Hello, everybody. This is Joseph P. Farrell with news and views from the Nefarium on Thursday, August 10th, 2023. Quite a nauseating little piece we have to share with you today. But first, I want to talk about the housekeeping issues. Tomorrow, we do have a vid chat that is scheduled. I am going to go ahead with that schedule in spite of the threat of some possible storms either tomorrow morning or tomorrow afternoon. Hopefully they will not be in the area. If we do have storms and I have to cancel, then I'll just archive everyone's comments and do a makeup vid chat. So we are on for tomorrow's vid chat. I'm going to probably start it early though. So if you're looking to participate in the vid chat, I'm estimating I might start about 1 p.m., perhaps a little earlier or a little later depending on the situation, but we are on. That does mean get your questions and comments in by 10 o'clock tonight, Thursday, August 10th, by 10 o'clock U.S. Central Time. So I said we have something perfectly nauseating. And this was spotted by one of our regular article contributors. We'll call him or her simply MD. And it is actually a posting on the U.S. government's Department of State's website concerning child trafficking in the Ukraine. And I want to read, this is literally 7 pages of typical government boilerplate. I just want to read a few sections from this incredibly damning document. But I have to caution you, you have to listen with carefully attuned ears because, of course, the government boilerplate is going to try and disguise really what they're admitting. But it becomes very clear. So I'm going to start at the very beginning of this. The actual file is from the Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons. And it concerns the Ukraine. And of course, folks, I am going to add the definite article to the English. This idea that we have to follow the grammar of a Slavic nation which does not have a definite article in its language and refer to Ukraine. No, it's the Ukraine in English. And State Department people, get on the ball and quit mangling the English language. But you've got to read this to believe what they're saying here. So I'm just going to read a few sections. This is 7 pages of boilerplate. I've picked a few things here just to let you know how despicable this whole war in the Ukraine is. Here we go. Quote, "The government of the Ukraine does not fully meet the minimum standards for the elimination of trafficking," that's human trafficking, folks, "but is making significant efforts to do so. The government demonstrated overall increasing efforts compared with the previous reporting period. Therefore, the Ukraine remained on Tier 2. Now, let me read that whole sentence again. They're improving their efforts, but the efforts haven't moved them up at all. The government of the Ukraine does not fully meet the minimum standards for the elimination of trafficking, but is making significant efforts to do so. The government demonstrated overall increasing efforts compared with the previous reporting period. Therefore, the Ukraine remained on Tier 2. These efforts included significantly increasing cooperation with European counterparts on anti-trafficking investigations despite diminished resources and capacity due to, and listen to this, Russia's full-scale war against the Ukraine. Now, folks, this is a phrase that is repeated almost monotonously throughout the 7 pages of boilerplate. It's either Russia's full-scale invasion or Russia's full-scale war. And I've got news for you, State Department. The invasion of the Ukraine was nothing even approximately close to a full-scale military invasion by Russia. Now, it's getting there because Russia has, of course, decimated the Ukrainian military. And it could turn out that way because, of course, we in the West prevented the Ukraine from negotiating a peace settlement, which Zelensky was prepared to do, if you recall, a year ago. So, in other words, if you want to place part of the blame for the human trafficking on the West, you're free to do so because I'd be right there with you. Anyway, to continue. Finally, the government increased awareness efforts, especially among displaced Ukrainians, and screened for potential trafficking victims among vulnerable populations. During the reporting period, the Ukraine's government operated on a total war footing to withstand Russia's unprovoked full-scale invasion. There it is, folks, more boilerplate. The Ukraine and the West did absolutely nothing to provoke this invasion, and it's all Russia's fault. Folks, I'm sorry, that is a total, absolute, outright lie. During the reporting period, the Ukraine's government operated on a total war footing to withstand Russia's unprovoked full-scale invasion, performing a range of core functions to mitigate trafficking risks despite major war-related challenges, continued Russian strikes on Ukrainian and civilian and critical infrastructure targets, and displacement of nearly 1/3 of the Ukraine's population. There we're getting some admission, many of whom faced increased human trafficking risks. However, the government did not meet the minimum standards in several key areas. Authorities prosecuted and convicted fewer traffickers, and most convicted traffickers avoided imprisonment. The lenient sentencing weakened deterrence, did not adequately reflect the nature of the crime, and undercut broader efforts to fight trafficking, despite persistent concerns about corruption fostering impunity for trafficking crimes. For the 6th consecutive year, the government did not secure any convictions of complicit officials. In other words, folks, we're backing not only a bunch of Nazis, but people trafficking in humanity. And they knew this. Now, if you're mad, I hope so, because I'm not just mad, I'm livid. The government identified fewer victims, and while the government took some steps to protect unaccompanied children, deficiencies in the government's oversight of children evacuated from Ukrainian care institutions increased their trafficking risk. Non-governmental organizations continued to identify systemic shortcomings in the implementation of the NRM and victim services. Now let me skip just a little ways further into this boilerplate. The government decreased law enforcement efforts. Law enforcement capacity may have been affected by other critical wartime policing needs in government-controlled areas or lack of access to occupied territory. Article 149 of the Criminal Code criminalized sex trafficking and labor trafficking and prescribed penalties of 3 to 8 years imprisonment, which were sufficiently stringent and, with respect to sex trafficking, commensurate with those prescribed for other serious crimes such as rape. An international organization reported Russia's, here it is again, full-scale invasion. Enforcement only operated in areas that remained under government control, but not in territories occupied by Russia's forces. And let me skip once again just a little bit further to give you kind of an evenly spaced sampling of all this self-congratulatory boilerplate. Non-government organizations reported trafficking risks increased for such children due to the conflict. In other words, blame it on the conflict rather than, as they admitted earlier, 6 years. The invasion started last year, folks. 6 years of dealing with this, and the Ukrainian government was not able to move off of their Tier 2 status. That's the regime that the Biden-Joe administration, or misadministration, is sending billions of our increasingly worthless tax dollars to, while they can't close the borders here and won't fix the roads here. You want to know what a crime is? I suspect that's it. And that means they're complicit in all of this trafficking that apparently is going on in the Ukraine. Continuing. At least 195 education, healthcare, social protection, and private institutions for children were evacuated. The government developed recommendations for countries receiving Ukrainian children, visited institutions for children, pardon me, and worked with international law enforcement to identify possible child trafficking victims. However, experts expressed serious concerns with the government's evacuation efforts, with consistent and troubling reports highlighting Ukrainian children's vulnerability to exploitation, including trafficking. Media reported in one case where a Ukrainian legal guardian of 10 Ukrainian children abused and allegedly exploited the children in sex trafficking in Poland. So let me go back and reread that opening sentence of what, as far as I'm concerned, is an incredibly damning document. The government of the Ukraine does not fully meet the minimum standards for the elimination of trafficking, but is making significant efforts to do so. The government demonstrated overall increasing efforts compared with the previous reporting period. Therefore, the Ukraine remained on Tier 2. Folks, that kind of waffling, that kind of jumble, that kind of conflict within the first 3 opening sentences means that they knew all about this. The interesting thing here is that it confirms what I've been saying all along. The Ukraine is a beta test, as we've seen, for possible biowarfare, and it's a possible beta test for human trafficking and laundering all sorts of money, and laundering weapons sales as well. By the way, those weapons are turning up in odd places like Africa. I cannot tell you how angry and livid I am. I cannot tell you how angry and livid I am. And all this while, let's remember, the leadership of the West, the so-called leadership of the West, was ignoring Russia's repeated attempts to alert us to this trafficking and the nature of the government that the West helped install after its Maidan coup in Kiev. And by the way, yes, I'm going to keep calling it Kiev, not Kyiv, and Kharkov, not Kharkiv, and Lugansk, not Luhansk, because this regime looks like it might have squandered any attempt at its own national sovereignty and will soon be back to speaking Russian. And if this is the nature of the trafficking going on in the Ukraine, as far as I'm concerned, it can't happen a moment too soon. So don't forget, we have the vid chat taking place tomorrow. It will probably be early. Get your comments and questions submitted no later than 10 o'clock U.S. Central Time tonight, and we'll see you on the flip side, folks. And I hope you join me and make it a part of your thoughts, if you're not the praying sword, or part of your prayers, to pray for an end to this awful, awful war and this awful practice of human trafficking. Bye-bye, folks, and we'll see you on the flip side. God bless.